Imagine sitting comfortably in your home. The evening feels peaceful, almost perfect, until you hear a noise on the other side of the room, just near the table. Something small, almost too quiet to notice. Your heart skips a beat as the silence returns, but you can't shake the feeling that you're not really alone. Tonight, you will hear 3 true stories from people who found out, far too late, how the place they trusted most became the place they feared the most. Because when the lights go out and you're by yourself, the real danger begins. But before we get started, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's journey into the darkness is just the beginning. These stories are only going to get more terrifying, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments below, because the night is only getting started, and the horror is about to unfold. Claire had been looking forward to a quiet night alone. The kind of night where the world outside slows down, and the only sounds are the familiar rhythms of her own home. It was a stormy evening in a small suburban neighborhood, a place where neighbors usually waved as they passed by, but tonight the streets were empty, save for the distant flash of lightning cutting through thick clouds. Inside the house, the old heater hummed softly, fighting against the chill creeping through the windows. The light above the kitchen sink flickered faintly, casting uneven shadows across the worn countertops. Outside, the wind tapped against the glass, like fingers trying to find a way in. The faint rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, low and distant, but close enough to remind Claire of the night's restless energy. She checked her phone one last time, hoping for a message from a friend to break the silence. But the signal was weak, barely registering a single bar. Somewhere nearby, the power flickered, causing the hallway light to dim briefly before steadying again. The neighbors' houses were dark, windows shuttered as if the whole street had gone to sleep, or maybe had simply left. Claire felt the quiet pressing in around her, a stillness so complete it almost felt like holding one's breath underwater. She moved slowly through the rooms, the creaks of the old wooden floor beneath her feet echoing louder than usual. In the living room, the ticking of a grandfather clock counted away the seconds, steady and unchanging. But as she settled into the worn armchair by the window, a subtle unease began to grow, a feeling that she was being watched, though no one was there. A faint sound came from upstairs, almost too soft to notice. A slow, dragging noise like footsteps on the floorboards, but the house was supposed to be empty. Tonight, Claire wasn't just alone. Something else was stirring. As the night deepened, the storm outside grew fiercer. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows and making the house shudder with each gust. Claire sat quietly, trying to focus on a book, but her eyes kept drifting toward the ceiling, as if waiting for something to happen. The soft, almost rhythmic noise she had heard earlier returned, a faint scraping, like something being slowly dragged across the attic floor. She told herself it was probably just the house settling, or maybe a branch brushing against the roof. But the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more deliberate, more real. Claire's breath caught as the noise shifted, now accompanied by a faint thump, and then a slow creak of a door opening somewhere above her. The attic door, she thought, but the attic had been sealed shut for years, ever since the previous owner had moved out. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone to call her best friend, but the screen showed no signal. No bars at all. A cold sweat ran down her neck. The heater's soft hum seemed distant now, as if it were struggling against an invisible weight pressing down on the room. Suddenly, a faint draft brushed past her, making the pages of her book flutter. She looked up sharply, her eyes scanning the shadows near the doorway. There was a moment of silence, a pause that felt endless, before a slow knock came from the attic stairs. 3 sharp, measured knocks. Not loud enough to be heard outside the room, but unmistakably close. Claire's heart hammered in her chest as she rose cautiously, each step heavy with dread. She reached the foot of the attic stairs, staring upward into the darkness above. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered wildly, then steadied. Her eyes searched the gloom, but saw nothing. Still, the sounds continued, footsteps now pacing just above her, slow and soft, moving back and forth, as if someone was walking the length of the attic, watching, waiting. In the dim light, she noticed something odd, a small object lying near the stairs. A dusty, yellowed photograph. She picked it up carefully, wiping away years of grime. It showed a family she didn't recognize, standing in front of the house. On the back, a faded note in shaky handwriting. Leave before the visitor comes. Claire swallowed hard, the room suddenly feeling much colder. The visitor? What visitor? And was it still here? Claire's hands trembled as she stared up at the attic door. The faint glow from the hallway light cast long shadows across the stairs, but the darkness inside the attic remained impenetrable. Her breath hitched. The air around her grew heavy, colder than before, as if the very atmosphere was thickening with something unseen. She knew she had to see what was up there, but every instinct screamed at her to turn away. Slowly, she reached out and grasped the old wooden handle. It was colder than the air itself, slick with moisture. With a soft creak, the attic door began to open, revealing a narrow staircase swallowed by darkness. She took a shaky step up, the worn boards groaning underfoot, the sound sharp and echoing in the confined space. As her eyes adjusted, she made out a faint outline, an old trunk, coated with dust and cobwebs, sitting in the far corner. The smell of damp wood and forgotten things filled her nostrils. Claire's heart pounded loudly enough that she was sure it echoed off the attic walls. She moved toward the trunk, each step slow and deliberate, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on her. Her fingers found the latch, stiff and resistant. With effort, it gave way, revealing the contents inside: old photographs, yellowed letters, and strange objects that looked out of place in a family attic. Then, as she pulled one photograph from the pile, a soft but sudden slam echoed through the attic. The door had shut behind her. Claire spun around, panic rising in her chest, but the door was firmly closed. She pounded on it, shouting, but her voice seemed swallowed by the darkness. The faint sound of footsteps, soft and slow, circled around her, growing closer. The air grew colder still, her breath visible in the dim light. Then, barely audible but unmistakable, a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Frozen in place, Claire felt the temperature drop further, the walls closing in. The visitor had arrived. Claire's pounding on the door finally grew faint as exhaustion overtook her. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time lost meaning in that suffocating darkness. Then, without warning, the door creaked open just enough for her to slip through, gasping for fresh air. She stumbled down the stairs, heart still hammering, the house silent except for the storm raging outside. Outside, rain poured in sheets, drenching her as she scrambled down the porch steps and into the night. She didn't stop until the neighbor's porch light came into view. Empty, dark, no sign of anyone. When she finally caught her breath, Claire called the police. But there was no sign of forced entry. No footprints, no disturbances. The officers found nothing unusual in the attic. No sign anyone had been there, no trunk, no note. Weeks later, Claire uncovered an old family journal tucked away in the basement, a diary belonging to her grandmother. Within its fragile pages, she read a story she'd never heard before. Her grandmother had lived in the same house decades ago and had locked the attic door for one simple reason. The visitor was a man who had once lived there, a man who disappeared mysteriously after a terrible storm. Locals whispered that he never truly left. The note, the footsteps, the cold air, they were warnings left behind through time, echoing across generations. Claire's grandmother had written in trembling script, some doors should remain closed. Some visitors should never be invited in. And now, the visitor had found her. Michael was used to the solitude of his small apartment, nestled deep within the walls of an aging building that had seen decades pass quietly around it. The creaking pipes, the faded wallpaper peeling in corners, the soft hum of the heating unit, all familiar sounds that had become the backdrop to his everyday life. Tonight, like many nights before, he was alone, preparing to settle in for sleep after a long day of classes and study. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp near the bed, casting soft shadows on the worn carpet and faded furniture. The old wooden floorboards groaned gently beneath his feet as he moved about, turning off lights and locking windows against the chill night air. The scent of the city outside drifted faintly through a cracked window, the distant honks of cars, muffled footsteps on the pavement. But inside, the apartment felt different tonight. Quieter, colder. As Michael brushed his teeth in the small bathroom, his gaze flicked toward the large mirror hanging on the wall across the room. For a moment, something caught his eye, a movement behind him in the reflection. A faint figure, just a shape really, standing still watching. His heart quickened. He spun around, but the room was empty. No one was there. Shaking off the unease, he tried to laugh it off, blaming tiredness or shadows playing tricks on his eyes. Yet when he returned to the bedroom, the chill remained. The air was unnervingly cold, biting against his skin, as if someone had opened a window he hadn't noticed. He wrapped his arms around himself, scanning the room once more, eyes settling on the mirror again. There it was, the shape clearer now, though still blurred, standing motionless behind where he had just been. His breath caught, pulse quickening. He reached out, touched the mirror's cool surface. No one was there, but the reflection remained. Michael knew then this was no ordinary night. Something in his apartment was watching him, waiting for the darkness to fall deeper. Night deepened around Michael's apartment, and with it, the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest refused to fade. The figure in the mirror lingered, not moving, not changing, but always there, just beyond the edge of his vision. At first, he tried to ignore it, focusing on small tasks like tidying the cluttered desk or scrolling through his phone, but the reflection never left. The air grew colder still, chilling his skin in spots as if invisible hands traced across his arms. Lights flickered intermittently. Once the bedroom lamp dimmed sharply before brightening again, and the soft glow of his laptop screen seemed to warp, the image flickering in a way no device should. His phone buzzed with no notification, the screen flashing a brief, ghostly white. Then, the television switched on by itself, startling him. Static filled the screen, the crackling noise loud in the silent room. He reached to turn it off, but the remote slipped from his fingers as if pushed by some unseen force. Michael's pulse raced. The shadow in the mirror seemed to edge closer, its shape becoming more defined, an outline of a face, pale and expressionless, eyes that never blinked. He tried filming the mirror with his phone, hoping to capture what his eyes saw, to prove it wasn't all in his head. When he played back the video, the screen showed the figure clearly, standing right behind him. Yet when he turned around, the room was empty. No sound, no movement, just silence. Every reflective surface, windows, phone screen, polished table, revealed the same haunting presence. Covering mirrors and closing blinds didn't help. The figure watched him, patient and unmoving, an uninvited guest in his own home. With each passing hour, the apartment felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. Michael's breathing grew shallow, the cold crept deeper into his bones. He wasn't sure how long he could stay awake, or if staying awake would even keep him safe. Michael's unease had transformed into outright terror. The night stretched on endlessly, shadows creeping closer with every passing minute. The figure in the mirror no longer stayed still. It moved, slow, deliberate, stepping forward within the glass's reflection, but never crossing the threshold into the room itself. Its face, once vague, had sharpened into something cold and unreadable, pale, without expression, eyes fixed in a hollow stare. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it would give away his presence. He clutched the edge of the desk, knuckles white, eyes locked on the mirror. Then suddenly the reflection shifted. The figure's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, a low, almost inaudible whisper echoed inside his mind, a sound not carried by air but by some deeper force. "You see me, but you cannot leave." Panic surged through Michael as the apartment's temperature plunged. His breath clouded before him as frost crept along the edges of the window pane. The TV, long since silent, burst to life again, broadcasting a distorted image of his own terrified face, frozen mid-scream. Lights flickered violently, shadows danced wildly along the walls. Then, the impossible happened. His reflection froze, but the figure behind him did not. Within the mirror's glass, the dark shape reached out, fingers stretching forward, breaking free of its own reflection. Michael's gaze locked on those silent, unblinking eyes as the figure leaned closer, almost crossing over, trapped between two worlds. He turned sharply, desperate to confront what was behind him. But the room was empty. The cold was all that remained, pressing down, suffocating, as the silence swallowed his frantic breathing. The reflection held the secret, but he was caught, unable to look away, unable to escape what waited just beyond the glass. Michael fled the apartment the next morning, leaving behind the cold shadows and the mirror that had held his torment. He stayed with friends, refusing to return to the place that had become a prison. Weeks passed, and life began to settle back into a fragile normality, until a package arrived at his new address. No sender's name, no note, only a carefully wrapped box. Inside lay an old mirror, its surface dulled with age and speckled with tiny cracks that seemed to crawl beneath the glass like veins. A single phrase was etched faintly across the back: "I'm still here." The weight of those words pressed down on Michael like a physical force. He could almost hear the whisper again, echoing through the silent rooms of his apartment. He tried to discard the mirror, but each time it returned, left on his doorstep, placed beside his bed, or resting silently in the corner of a room he thought he'd cleared. The reflection inside the glass was never empty. That same pale figure lingered, watching, waiting. Friends grew distant, unable to understand the fear that gripped him. Michael's nights became restless, haunted by dreams of frozen faces and endless reflections. The boundary between what was real and what was trapped behind the glass blurred until even waking felt uncertain. He learned later that the building had a history, stories of tenants vanishing without a trace, of reflections that moved on their own, and of a presence tied to the mirrors themselves. Something that had slipped through from the other side, never fully leaving. Michael understood then that the figure was no stranger. It was bound to him now, a silent companion in every darkened room. A reminder that some reflections never fade, and some guests never leave. Lisa had always sought solitude in the quiet woods. Her cabin, nestled deep among towering trees and thick underbrush, was more than just a home. It was her refuge from the noise of the world. The winding dirt road leading to the clearing was long and often swallowed by fog, the kind that made even familiar paths seem unfamiliar. Here, surrounded by nature, she found a strange peace. But nights in the cabin were different. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of owls, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot, were muted, almost absent. Instead, an unnatural stillness settled over the woods after dark, broken only by the faint, haunting calls of distant animals. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Inside, the cabin was warm and simple. A fire crackled softly in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows along the rough wooden walls. Lisa moved quietly through the space, locking doors and windows with practiced care. The old locks clicked into place, bolting out the outside world. She double-checked each latch, confident everything was secure. But as she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, a cold shiver ran down her spine, an odd sensation that something was watching, waiting. Then, breaking the silence, came a sound that froze her blood, a door opening downstairs. Not a creak or groan of the old house settling, but a deliberate, slow opening of a door she knew had been locked tight. Her breath caught in her throat as she listened, the hairs on her arms rising. The cabin was supposed to be empty, supposed to be safe. Lisa's heart pounded as she strained to hear beyond the faint sounds of the night. The woods pressed close around the cabin, dark and thick, hiding secrets that stretched far beyond the tree line. But inside, something had crossed the threshold, something she hadn't invited. The sound of the door opening echoed through the cabin, a slow and deliberate creak that seemed to stretch into the night like a warning. Lisa's breath hitched as she stood frozen, every sense sharpened and alert. She had locked that door herself just moments before. There was no way it should have moved. And yet, there it was, opening again, a soft but unmistakable sound of wood scraping against the floor. She moved cautiously, every footstep muffled against the worn rug. The fire flickered weakly in the hearth, casting long shadows that shifted and danced like silent figures across the walls. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, rustling branches that tapped against the cabin like soft fingers reaching in. The air inside grew colder, unnaturally so, as if a window had been left open, though Lisa knew she had shut every pane tight. A faint smell drifted through the room, a mix of damp earth and smoke, something ancient and unsettling. It filled the space between the warmth of the fire and the chill creeping up her spine. Lisa's eyes scanned the room for any sign of movement. She noticed small changes, objects slightly out of place, a chair angled differently than she remembered, a blanket tossed carelessly where it had been folded neatly. The sounds came again, footsteps on the creaky wooden floor, slow and cautious as if someone, or something, was pacing just beyond her sight. She reached for her phone to call for help, but the screen remained dark, dead of signal. No service, no connection to the outside world. She was completely alone, or so she thought. Setting up a small security camera seemed the only option to catch whatever was moving through her home. But when Lisa reviewed the footage, the screen was filled with static, the images distorted and broken at crucial moments. The camera caught no figure, no shadow, only flickers of static that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The unseen presence was not just watching, it was playing, moving with intention, a silent game unfolding in the empty spaces of her refuge. The night deepened, and with it, the weight of silence grew heavier in Lisa's cabin. The cold pressed into every corner, creeping beneath doors and slipping through cracks as if it had a life of its own. She lay awake, heart pounding against her ribs, the shadows around her thickening like a living thing. Suddenly, the breathing started. Not her own, but a slow, heavy inhalation just beyond the edge of hearing. It was there, soft, rhythmic, impossibly close. Lisa's eyes darted around the dark room, barely visible in the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. The air felt charged, every molecule thick with tension. Then, a presence emerged from the shadows, at first just a shape, a vague outline near the window. She blinked, trying to clear her vision, but the figure remained, still and silent. As her eyes adjusted, she could see the faintest details, an outline of a person standing, motionless, watching her. A sudden gust swept through the room, causing the curtains to billow and the fire in the hearth to sputter. The figure didn't move, but the temperature dropped sharply, Lisa's breath now visible in the cold air. The cabin felt smaller, as if walls were closing in, trapping her in a space where the past and present blurred. She reached for the light switch, but the bulb shattered with a sharp crack, plunging the room into darkness. The heavy breathing grew louder, accompanied now by slow footsteps pacing just outside her bedroom door. Lisa's pulse thundered in her ears as the footsteps stopped. The door creaked open with agonizing slowness. For a moment, all was still. Then a whisper barely audible. "You can't leave." Frozen, Lisa watched the door's shadow stretch across the floor, waiting for something, anything, to appear. But when she finally summoned the courage to look, the room was empty. The only proof of the visitor's presence was the open door and the chill that refused to fade. The first light of dawn crept softly through the cabin's windows, casting pale beams across the worn wooden floor. Lisa sat quietly, wrapped in a thick blanket, the fire long since reduced to glowing embers. Though the morning brought a fragile calm, the weight of the night's terror clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. She moved through the cabin, searching for answers in the scattered objects. The chair moved, the blanket tossed, but there was no sign of who or what had disturbed her sanctuary. The air still held that strange scent, earthy and smoky, and the cold lingered in corners that should have been warm. Later that day, she spoke with a neighbor, an old man who had lived in the area for decades. His eyes darkened when she mentioned the strange noises, the footsteps, the open door. He told her stories, whispers about the cabin's past, of the man who vanished without a trace years ago, and of others who had stayed there, only to leave suddenly, claiming the place was not empty. He warned her that the woods around the cabin held secrets, that the boundary between this world and something else was thin there. "Some things don't leave," he said quietly. "They stay behind, waiting." Lisa realized then that the visitor was not a random presence. It was tied to the land, to the cabin, to the history buried beneath the trees. It was a presence that slipped between moments, lingering just out of reach. And though the door was locked, the visitor had come in, unseen, uninvited, and unwilling to leave. Being home alone at night can feel peaceful. But sometimes, what you don't see lurking in the quiet is the most dangerous of all. Tonight, you've heard stories of those who faced what hides in the silence, who discovered the unseen guests sharing their space. And though these tales ended, for now, the question remains, what about your home? What waits in the quiet corners when the lights go out? Which story chilled you the most? Which one made your skin crawl, or your breath catch in your throat? Have you ever felt eyes on you when you were supposed to be alone? Have you heard footsteps where there should be none? Share your stories below, your real experiences, your questions, your fears. Because sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones we live ourselves. If you want more true horror stories, real tales that will keep you awake long after the screen goes dark, then hit that subscribe button now. Turn on notifications, because the darkness has many secrets yet to be told, and we're only just beginning to uncover them. Stay safe, but stay watchful.